Chapter 6. Mastering Small Group Presentations and Negotiations. The greatest good you can do for another is not just to share your own riches, but to reveal to him his own. That's from Benjamin Disraeli. Most of the opportunities for you to win points speaking will take place in small business meetings. As I discussed in Chapter 5, it's important to know how to lead and participate in meetings effectively. But in these meetings, you will often be called upon to make a presentation of your point of view, product, or policy in an attempt to persuade others to agree with you and to support your recommended course of action. So if business meetings are an essential tool for the executive, the presentations made in those meetings may be even more important. Many people have changed the entire direction of their careers and their companies by making an effective presentation to a small group of people with decision-making power. You can do the same. Small group presentations can make or break your career. Each time you give a presentation to a small group, imagine that your future and your career hang in the balance. Imagine that this meeting is being videotaped to be shown to thousands of people. Imagine there's a hidden camera on you while you are making your presentation, and it is showing your presentation to people all over the country. In other words, take the presentation seriously. The more seriously you take your presentation in advance, the more seriously the participants will respond to you. As in all meetings of any size, preparation is the key to success. It will account for fully 90% of the results that you get or fail to get. As a top lawyer once said to me, I don't believe that there is any such word as over-prepare. Start with the end in mind. Determine your goals for the presentation. Idealize and ask yourself, if this meeting were perfect, what would be the outcome? Think on paper. Write down the very best things that could possibly happen if your presentation were perfectly effective and you achieved every goal you had in mind. The greater clarity you have with regard to the perfect outcome, the easier it will be to prepare your presentation, and the more likely it is that you will achieve those goals at the end. Remember that everything is a negotiation. When you are giving a small group presentation in an attempt to persuade others to support you, you're engaging in a form of negotiation. Each person will come into the room with his or her ideas and desires. Your aim is to bring the group around to your own personal point of view and convince them to support your recommendations. This means that you will have to gradually change their minds and, in some cases, change their minds completely. Think like a lawyer. Use the lawyer's method to prepare for a presentation. Lawyers learn to prepare the opponent's case before they prepare their own. To do this, write down everything that you think the other participants in the meeting will want or think that is in opposition to what you want to accomplish. If you can be specific, attach the particular objections and resistance to the particular people to whom you'll be speaking. Know the difference between desire and fear. With one group of executives at a large company with whom I negotiate once or twice a year, I begin by writing out the things I know about their concerns and reasons for skepticism or hesitancy. Most of all, I know that they are resistant to change. This is quite common when you are giving a presentation. People have a tendency to get into a comfort zone and then to resist any attempts or suggestions to move them out of this comfort zone. The two primary motivations for buying, or for almost any other decision to change, are fear and desire. People are afraid of losing time, money, prestige, advantage, or something else. People desire more time, more money, more market share, more opportunity, and so on. Psychologists tell us that the motivating power of fear is 2.5 times the motivating power of desire. This means that emphasizing what the participants can lose from not accepting your ideas is 2.5 times more persuasive than emphasizing what they can gain. In many cases, however, the primary benefit you have to offer is that the participants will gain from your ideas. The main reason that anyone does anything revolves around the word improvement. That is, people take action because they believe that they will be better off as a result of acting than they would be if they did not act at all. So even when you are appealing to fear, the fears of rejection, criticism, loss, embarrassment, disapproval, ridicule, and so on, you are suggesting that the participant's situation will improve relative to these fears if she takes your advice. Understand the meeting participants. When making a presentation to a group of people, you are often dealing with several distinctly different personalities. This means that each person will have different fears and desires in different degrees of intensity. The more knowledgeable you are about what people want to accomplish and what they are afraid of experiencing, the easier it will be for you to tailor your remarks and address their concerns. I know that the group of executives at the company I mentioned earlier has a strong resistance to change, but they also have a strong desire to increase their sales and profits. Therefore, I always focus on making a strong case for increased sales and profitability, and then to allay their fears of loss, I suggest a low-cost, no-cost test of my idea or product to see if it's capable of delivering the proper revenues and profits that I'm suggesting. Over the years, I have found that people are usually quite open to a limited test with limited risk on a new idea. On the other hand, they're usually extremely tense about risking a large amount of money to try out an untested idea. Understand common fears. Most adults are afraid of being manipulated or taken advantage of. They're afraid of being hustled, talked into doing something that is contrary to their short-term or long-term interests, being sold a product, a service, or an idea that they don't need, can't use, and can't afford, or of ending up worse off after they've accepted a recommendation than they were before. People have these fears because, starting in childhood, they have been talked into doing or not doing things that have not turned out well, and they have been taken advantage of by a variety of people. As a result, most people have an almost Pavlovian response to anyone who is attempting to persuade them to do anything. They are naturally skeptical and suspicious. Each time a person is taken advantage of and feels that he has come out on the short end of the stick, he says to himself, consciously and subconsciously, "This won't happen to me again." You should consider this when making a small group presentation. Lower their resistance. Whenever you make a presentation for a new idea, product, or service, these fears of being taken advantage of or manipulated or making a mistake are triggered in the minds and hearts of your listeners, making them naturally resistant and skeptical. Your job while speaking is to do everything possible to lower this resistance and remove this skepticism. Use the Socratic method of presentation. When you want to introduce a new subject to another individual or group, always begin with the facts of the matter that everyone agrees with and around which there is no controversy. Then, leverage these facts into areas that may be new and with which people may disagree. Negotiating big deals. When I have negotiated large contracts with groups of people, often with myself on one side of the table and 6 to 10 other officials or executives on the other side of the table, I've always followed a strategy that has proved successful time after time. We start off with a contract or a development agreement of 30, 40, or even 50 pages. I will have carefully reviewed every clause in the agreement ahead of time. I'll have done my preparation, and I'll be quite clear about which clauses are most important to me and which elements of the contract are likely to be most important to the other parties. We then go through the agreement paragraph by paragraph and line by line, discussing and agreeing or disagreeing with each point as we move along. 80% of the various clauses and subclauses in contracts are boilerplate and non-controversial. We therefore go through all of these clauses from the first to the last page and agree on all of the things that we agree on. When we come to a part of the agreement where we disagree, I conduct a short discussion around this point to get the other side's thoughts and feelings, and then I say, why don't we put this point aside for now and come back to it later? We then go on to the next point and continue to work step by step through the agreement, putting aside each controversial point as we go along so as not to interrupt the flow. Once we've reviewed the entire agreement and agreed upon most of the clauses, we then go back through the more controversial points. We discuss each point as thoroughly as possible, If one is a particularly emotional sticking point, I once again suggest that we put it aside. The second time through the agreement, we will resolve about 80% of the 20% of unresolved issues, leaving us with only about 4% of the total agreement left to be discussed and agreed upon. By this time, we have agreement on as much as 96% of the clauses and subclauses. Everyone is positive and feeling a sense of forward progress. We can now go back through and discuss in depth, with less emotion and more openness, the unresolved parts of the contract. The law of 4. There is a law of 4 in negotiating. This law says that there are only 4 main issues that need to be discussed and resolved in the course of any negotiation. It also says that the opposing parties must have a different order of value and priority on these 4 issues for an agreement to take place. For example, if one party is concerned about the price above all, and the other party is concerned about the quality or speed of delivery above all, then a negotiation can proceed to a satisfactory conclusion where a price is agreed upon in return for dependable, consistent delivery and quality. It is only when both parties are adamant about the same issue, like the price, that a stalemate can occur. Your job prior to giving a group presentation is to identify the 4 major issues that you will eventually come to in the course of your discussion, and then determine how you can offset, neutralize, or compensate for their major concerns so that you can be satisfied on your major concerns. Presentation through negotiation. The principles remain the same. When you make a presentation to a small group, the process may not be as lengthy or as dramatic as a 2 or 3 day negotiating session with large amounts of money and egos at stake, but the principles remain the same. You must think through the concerns of the participants in the meeting and the 4 main issues on which you will have to get agreement if you want to proceed. You then design your entire presentation so that you achieve that goal by the end of the discussion. Think on paper. When making a business presentation, you should think on paper. Write down all the objections that an intelligent person could give you for not proceeding with your idea or accepting your recommendations. Then write out 1 or more logical answers to each of those objections. When the question, concern, or objection comes up, you should treat it with great respect and appear to think carefully about how you might best address that concern. Express acceptance, agreement, and appreciation. Then, present your already carefully considered answer to the objection as though it just occurred to you in the last few seconds. Always appear reasonable and agreeable. Whatever the concern, resistance, or objection might be to your idea, always treat it with friendliness, courtesy, and grace. Never throw gasoline on the fire. The more low-key and friendly you are when you deal with the concerns or antagonisms of people in your meeting, the more open they will be to considering your ideas. Remember the lyrics, "A spoonful of sugar makes the medicine go down." When you give a small group presentation, remember that it is not a dramatic monologue. It's a conversation. Present a point, wrap it up and summarize it, and then invite questions or comments from the participants. Get them involved. The more you can involve the participants in the discussion as you go along, the better sense you will have for how they are thinking and feeling, and the more likely it is that they will agree with you at the end of your presentation. There's a special feature of group dynamics that you need to include in your presentations. It is this. Each member of the group feels that you are personally treating him or her the same way that you are treating any other member in the group. Group solidarity. When you treat any member of the group with friendliness and respect, every member of the group feels as if she too is being treated with friendliness and respect. Each member of the group feels that he is part of a whole. On the other hand, if you treat any member of the group with irritation or impatience, the other members of the group feel that you are treating them the same way. So, be careful. Determine the pecking order. Even though you must treat everyone equally, when you make small group presentations, you must be very alert to the pecking order of the members of the group. In many groups, one of the members is more important than the others. His or her opinion, expressed verbally or non-verbally, carries more weight than that of anyone else. From the top person on down, there is a descending order of priority. Someone is first in importance. Someone is second. Someone is third in importance. Some people attending the meeting will have little or no clout at all. For you to make an effective presentation, you must be clear who carries the most weight, and then organize your presentation so that you continually address the most powerful person in the group. In some cases, the top person will say very little. In other cases, the top person will say a lot. When I was in the Arabian Gulf recently, I read up on the negotiating techniques and strategies of people in the Arab world. What I learned was that in any meeting, the person who sits quietly and says the least is the most powerful person in the room. The person who speaks the most and asks the most questions is the messenger boy and is often the least powerful or consequential in the negotiation. If I had not read that, the most talkative person might have unduly impressed me. In Western negotiating, the top person may say a lot or say a little. In any case, it's important that you know who this person is and that you defer to this person on a regular basis. You direct your comments to this person and then sweep the room, making eye contact with the other important people one at a time. You then come back to the top person and make sure that he or she is following you and understands the points that you are making. Now, there's a direct relationship between the amount of involvement in a conversation and the amount of commitment to the agreements made in the conversation. When you are talking with staff members, for example, the more you invite them to ask questions, comment, and agree or disagree, the more they will buy into whatever decisions people make. If people are not commenting or asking questions, they are not committing. They are merely listening. By not saying anything, they are avoiding participating in whatever decision is made and evading any responsibility for carrying out the decisions or the actions. Alfred P. Sloan, one of the founders of General Motors, would often convene a group of executives to discuss a new company, product, or policy. At the end of the meeting, he would ask, "Are there any questions or comments on these ideas?" If no one said anything, or if everyone agreed with the ideas presented, Sloan would say, "Obviously, the people in this room do not understand the importance of what we are discussing. If everyone is in agreement, then we must convene this meeting and reconvene at a later time. At that time, I expect comments and disagreements from the people around this table." What Sloan found, and what many executives and presenters find, is that if no one is saying anything, or if everyone is in agreement, no one has really given the idea much thought. This means that they will only start thinking about the ramifications of the discussions later, and this later thinking can sabotage the entire effort. Take a power position. When making a presentation to a small group, organize the room so that you have your back to a wall and the entrance is opposite you. With this setup, people can come and go without breaking up the flow of the meeting, and you can see each of them. The best setup for a small group presentation is a U-shape, in which you stand and present at the open end of the U. All the participants should sit around the outside of the U-shape so that almost everyone can see almost everyone else, eye to eye, across the tables. This setup is totally different from one in which everyone sits facing you, but next to, in front of, or behind the other participants. There is little or no communication or opportunity to share ideas, even by smiling, raising eyebrows, shrugging shoulders, and so on. Always try to set up the room so that everyone can see everyone else and see you as well. When I conduct a strategic planning session, I put all the executives on the outside of a U-shaped table. When I bring up a point or a question, I go around the table person by person and invite him or her to answer or comment. This method has been extraordinarily successful for me over the years. It gives every single person a chance to voice her ideas or concerns, and gives every other person a chance to watch and listen to the speaker express his or her thoughts. By the time we go around the table, we have had a rich, in-depth discussion that has covered a large number of points. Determine the next action. Remember, the purpose of a presentation, large or small, is to agree on an action of some kind. As the conversation evolves, you should be continually asking, what action do we take at this point? What action should we take on this issue? What is our next action if we are in agreement to this? When you are making a group presentation and a series of different actions is required, it's essential to get agreement from the group about exactly who is going to be responsible for the action and when it will be completed. Many excellent presentations that end with agreement on a course of action result in nothing happening. This is always because no one was assigned specific responsibility with a deadline for carrying out the actions that were agreed upon. Even if you have to repeat yourself or be a little demanding or assertive, it's essential that you get agreement on who is going to do what and by when if you are running the presentation. It's the ultimate goal of the presentation and the meeting. Your ability to follow up and ensure that these actions are taken is what gives the planning and the presentation value. Make it visual as well as auditory. In any group of people today, about 70% of the participants will be visual in orientation. The other 30% will be auditory. What this means is that 70% of the audience, the visuals, will need to see the facts, points, and illustrations in order to understand and process what you are saying. The other 30%, the auditories, will be able to understand and process the information simply by hearing it from you. As a result, 70% of your audience will probably only understand you if you illustrate what you are saying as you go along. Write down your presentation agenda so these people can follow. You could use PowerPoint for your key points, bringing them up on the screen one at a time as you make the points in your presentation. You can use a whiteboard or a flip chart to write down key points or to illustrate the ramifications and results of your presentation. People who are visual in orientation relax and take comfort when they can see your presentation unfolding. Auditories, on the other hand, are quite content with written or graphic material, but they very much like to hear what you have to say and will often ask questions about your specific meaning for a particular word or phrase. Be prepared. When I began to give seminar presentations, I started off using flip charts, then moved to a whiteboard, and now I use an overhead projector or a device called an Elmo. This allows me to write down my key points while they are projected on a screen behind or next to me. As I go through my presentation, I draw graphs, pictures, stick figures, and other illustrations to offer a visual representation of the key points I am making. When I emphasize a particular word or concept, I write it down clearly so that people can see it. As a result, people take an enormous number of notes. As soon as you write something down, people immediately sense that it is important and they write it down as well. This keeps them actively engaged in your presentation throughout. If you only speak with no written materials or illustrations, even the most brilliant mind will forget 80 to 90% of what you say before the end of your talk. When you speak and write, you capture both the auditories and the visuals and make your presentation an interesting and enjoyable experience for everyone in the room. When you receive a question or comment from a participant in your audience, unless it is perfectly clear what the person is asking or what he means, you should do one of two things. First of all, you should rephrase the comment or question so that it is clear in your own mind before you respond to it. You can then say, "Is this the question you were asking?" A second way to be sure that you are responding to the correct comment is to ask the participant to rephrase his question in such a way that you understand it better. Use the question, "How do you mean exactly?" whenever there is any lack of clarity or ambiguity on your part. How do you mean exactly? The dumbest thing you can do is to set off to answer the wrong question or respond to a comment that you misunderstood in the first place. Here's the summary. Resolve today to prepare thoroughly and be at your best in every group presentation. Remember that people who can influence your career are watching and evaluating your performance. Each time you open your mouth in a group to persuade, contribute, or disagree, you are moving yourself forward or backward, and everything counts. Chapter 7. Platform Mastery. Impressing large audiences. Dream lofty dreams, and as you dream, so shall you become. Your vision is the promise of what you shall one day be. By James Allen. Once upon a time, a meeting planner phoned a professional speaker to inquire into booking him for an upcoming event. The planner's first question was, "How much do you charge?" The speaker replied, "It depends on the length of the talk that you want me to give and the amount of time that it takes for preparation." The meeting planner then asked, "How much would you charge for a 30-minute talk, and how long would it take to prepare?" The speaker replied, "For a 30-minute talk, it would require 6 to 8 hours to prepare, and the fee would be $5,000. The meeting planner was surprised. "How much would you charge for a half-day talk, and how long would it take to prepare?" he asked. The speaker replied, "For a half-day talk, it would take about 3 to 4 hours to prepare. It would cost $4,000. "What about a full-day talk? How much is that?" "That would only cost $3,000. "How long would you require to prepare?" asked the meeting planner. "Oh," said the speaker, "if it's a full-day talk, I can start now." The shorter the talk, the more difficult it is to prepare for. My point in the preceding stories is that the shorter the talk, the greater the preparation and precision you need to deliver the talk within the time constraints allotted. If you have all day to speak, you can fill the time with stories, examples, and various points that revolve around your subject. If you have only 20 minutes, you must deliberately focus and concentrate on only those key elements that are necessary to get your message across. My first audience contained 7 people, but over the years I have spoken live to as many as 25,000 people at a time. On one occasion, I spoke to 85,000 people at one time, with 2,000 people in the live audience and 83,000 others in 600 locations via satellite hookup. The lengths of my talks and seminars range from 20 minutes up to 3 and 4 days in all. Every talk that I have given, either one time only or repeatedly, has required detailed preparation and practice in order to deliver it effectively and well. As your audience size grows, the requirements and demands of yourself as a speaker increase. Speaking to large audiences is very different from speaking to smaller groups. The 8 parts of a keynote talk. As I described in Chapter 1, there are 8 parts of a keynote talk of 20 to 60 minutes to a large group. You can use this model to plan and organize your remarks. Let me touch on these points once more. 1. The opening. This is where you grab the attention of the audience members, get them to focus on you, and make them look forward to your coming remarks. 2. The introduction. This is your transition into the first point of your talk. 3. The first point. This is where you begin to build your case. 4. The transition into the next point. This is where you indicate that you are making a transition from the first point to the second point. 5. The second key point. This follows naturally from your first point and builds on it. 6th is another transition. This is where you shift into your third point. Point 7 is the third key point. This follows naturally from your first and second points. And finally, number 8, the summary. This is where you wrap up your talk with a strong call to action. The 7 essential elements of a speech. There's a proven recipe or formula that you can use to design and present a speech on any subject to any audience. Each talk can be graded on a scale of 1 to 10 on each of these 7 parts. Whenever the speaker has a low score in any one of these areas, it undermines the effectiveness of the entire talk. The introduction and opening. It is essential that you make a good first impression when you stand up to speak. As it happens, making a good first impression begins well before your speech. As we've said before, preparation is the key. Start by taking a pad of paper and writing out your speech word for word. Use the down dump method I described in Chapter 2. Write out the title of the talk at the top of the page, and then write out every single point that you could make or include in this talk. Very often, this down dump of ideas fills up 2 or 3 pages. After you've completed the down dump, review the various points and begin to put them in sequence, clustering them around your major points. Record your entire talk and have it typed out, double-spaced, for you to review. Edit and polish the talk several times until you're happy with the sound, structure, and flow of the language. Once your talk is written out and you're satisfied with it, record it and then play it back, listening for parts that are unclear or that could be improved by rewriting. There are some other things you need to do to ensure that your talk begins well and that you make a good first impression. Practice makes perfect. Many people feel that Lincoln's Gettysburg Address is perhaps the finest single piece of oratory in the English language. The story was that he wrote the address on the back of an envelope as he rode by train to the dedication of the cemetery at Gettysburg. The truth is somewhat different. It seems that Lincoln had given parts of the Gettysburg Address in other speeches for several months before he crystallized it into what became oratorical history. He had practiced with various sentences and phrases until he finally had a perfect speech. Martin Luther King's "I Have a Dream" speech in Washington, D.C. is a wonderful and inspiring piece of oratory. But Martin Luther King had practiced delivering parts of that speech over and over again in the previous years. The final speech brought together the very best elements of many previous speeches. Check out the facility. A second part of making a powerful first impression is for you to arrive early, preferably the day before, and then walk through and familiarize yourself with the entire setup. Check the stage, the sound system, the lighting, and the seating of the audience. See Chapter 10 for more about what to look for. Never assume that someone else is going to care as much about the setup as you do. Remember, many of the people setting up meeting rooms for large and small audiences are minimum wage workers whose sole aim is to get the job done and get out. I know this firsthand because not long ago I was invited to give a 90-minute speech to 4,000 executives and staff of a fast-growing international company. It was a 3-day conference, and the company brought in a team of experts to set up the stage, side screens, sound, lighting, seating. I arrived at lunchtime in the middle of the second day. I arrived early, and I'm glad I did. My style of speaking includes writing notes on an overhead projector or an Elmo. I stand in the center of the stage with the projector to my right so that I can speak and illustrate my points as we go along, maintaining eye contact with the audience. In this case, the crew had set up the Elmo to the side, at the back of the stage, and facing in the opposite direction from the audience. When I pointed out, as gently as possible, that this setup would force me to walk away and face away from the audience each time I made a point, they shrugged their shoulders. It just wasn't that important to them. I quickly had them reposition the Elmo so I was facing the audience when I spoke, and the talk came off quite well. Mix with your audience. Prior to your talk, mingle with the meeting planners, your hosts, and if possible, some of the people who will be in your audience. Introduce yourself, ask them their names, and try to learn a little bit about them. Audience participants always enjoy talking to the speaker and asking questions. Your goal is to get a sense for the audience participants. You want to know what they are thinking and feeling. Above all, you want them to feel that you and they are on the same level. Listen to the other speakers. If your speech follows one or more other speeches, it's important that you arrive early and listen to the earlier speakers. It's essential that you know what has been said to this audience before you stand up to speak. Sometimes I'm booked to speak last thing in the morning, before lunch. My host will say, "You will be on at 11 a.m., so you don't have to be here until 10:30 a.m. In every case, however, I will be in the room when the first speaker, usually an executive of the company, begins the first remarks of the day. When it's my turn to speak, after my introduction, I will refer to what previous speakers have said, especially if a senior executive has made a point about the business. I will compliment the observations and contributions of the previous speakers by saying something like, "When your president, Robert Wilson, spoke to you earlier, he made an extremely important point." This proves to the audience that you care enough to participate fully in the meeting as they are doing. There's another reason why you want to hear the previous speakers. If you don't know what they've said, you could find yourself saying something the audience has already heard or that contradicts a point that someone made prior to your talk. For example, I remember giving a talk to 2,000 people in Chicago. My talk was after lunch, but I made it a point to be in the room by 8:30 a.m. when the other speakers began. The first speaker gave a good talk on the theme of the convention and wrapped up with a funny story. There was a 20-minute coffee break before the second speaker was introduced. The second speaker had not bothered to sit in on the first talk. He arrived just before he was scheduled to go on stage. His talk was also tied into the theme of the meeting, and at the end, to the surprise of the audience, he wrapped it up by telling the same story that the first speaker had used. This time there was a little bit of laughter and a certain amount of discomfort. You could see from the speaker's face that he was perplexed that so few people had laughed. Then the worst thing that you can imagine happened. The third speaker, who had also not attended the talks given by the first two speakers, got up, gave his talk, and ended with the same story. This time the audience was completely silent. Nobody thought the speaker was funny at all. In fact, it was clear to the audience that the speaker had not heard the earlier talks. You could see from the looks on the faces of the audience members that they had concluded that the speaker felt he was too important to arrive early. As a result, he bombed completely. Think on your feet. On several occasions, I planned my talk thoroughly in advance and then had to revise it quickly because of something that another speaker said just before I spoke. Sometimes speakers have used the same joke or story that I was going to use. Meet your introducer. To ensure a strong introduction, meet and talk with your introducer. Be sure you have prepared a written introduction in large print for him to read. At the top of the page, write the words, "Please read exactly as written." A poor introduction, badly read, can start you off on the wrong foot with any audience. It's amazing how often people who are asked to introduce a speaker make no effort to read or rehearse the introduction before they stand up. They read it in a clumsy and awkward fashion, stumbling and making mistakes. The way that you can guard against disappointing the audience is to be sure that your introduction is so well written that the introducer cannot hurt you if he does a poor job of reading it. Showtime. When you are introduced, take a deep breath and walk boldly and confidently onto the stage. Thank the introducer by either shaking hands or even giving him or her a hug if it's appropriate. Turn and face the audience members squarely, smiling as if you are really happy to see them. Remain silent for a few seconds, allowing the audience to settle down and center its attention on you. Let your eyes slowly sweep over the audience, dividing it into 4 sections or 4 quarters, with 2 quarters in front and 2 in the rear. Select someone in the center of each quarter part of the audience to focus on and return regularly to that person. Begin with a statement that immediately captures the audience's attention by addressing a common desire, concern, or problem of the audience. For example, when I speak to a business or sales audience, I will often start off by saying, "I have some good news for you." Pause. "We are living at the very best time in all of human history." And now pause. "More people are going to make more money in the years ahead than have been made in the last century. Your job is to be one of those people, and my job is to show you how to get there." With this type of an opening, I immediately capture the audience's interest, attention, and curiosity. People mentally and physically lean forward, eager to hear how to achieve this goal. Getting your point across. No matter what your speech or presentation is about, there are several things you must do to make sure your audience follows your logic, is engaged, and becomes open to your influence. Link each point back into the story. Anytime you use a story to get a point across, be sure to link it back to your point often. For example, by the time I deliver the introductory statement I used earlier about Alexander and Darius, everyone is leaning forward to hear the rest of the story. I then might explain how Alexander led his army against Darius at the Battle of Arbela, defeated Darius with superior generalship despite 10-to-1 odds, and went on to conquer most of the known world at that time. For the rest of my talk, I would explain the leadership qualities of vision, courage, commitment, determination, innovation, and responsibility demonstrated by Alexander in the achievement of this victory. By the end of the talk, each executive should see himself or herself as a potential Alexander, contesting great odds to achieve victory in competitive markets. Activate both brains. Nobel Prize-winning research concludes that humans have both a left and a right brain. The left brain is logical, practical, analytical, factual, and unemotional. This is the part of the brain that we use to take in information of all kinds. The right brain, on the other hand, is activated by pictures, emotions, music, and stories. People make decisions with their right brains. Your job is to activate and stimulate the right brains of your audiences as much as possible. The more you address your remarks and comments to the right brain, the more fully engaged the audience will be with you and with what you say. Remember the windshield wiper method I described earlier. As you develop your talk using facts and stories, select a person in the center of each quarter of the audience and return regularly to that person. Select people who are smiling and positive and who seem to be fully engaged in your message. Focus on these people one at a time and speak a complete sentence to them, as if they were the only person in the room. Then, sweep your eyes slowly to another person in another quarter of the room and deliver a line directly to him or her. Look directly at people in the audience. When you speak directly to a person, everyone behind that person, fanning out in a V shape, feels that you are speaking directly to him or her. When you speak to a person further back in the room, the people behind that person feel that they are the center of your attention. The more that people feel you are speaking and connecting directly with them, the more engaged they will be with you and with what you're saying. Stand and deliver. When speaking to a large audience, practice the stand and deliver method. Pick a 3-foot by 3-foot or 5-foot by 5-foot square and stay within that square. Discipline yourself not to move around over a wide area or rock back and forth. Avoid the tendency to step forward and backward continually. These motions are usually the result of nervousness. You can control them by being aware of them before you stand up to speak. Let your arms fall naturally at your sides. Do not fiddle or fumble with your clothing, and don't put your hands in your pockets. Bring your hands up naturally as you speak to make a point, and then let them fall again naturally to your sides. Making smooth transitions. This is very much like shifting gears. When you have developed a point completely, you need to signal clearly to the audience that you are moving on to a new point. If you don't, audience members will become confused and think that your remarks somehow tie into something that you've just said. Your transitions can be as simple as, the next point that I would like to touch on is. Sometimes I will say, now, moving right along, I want to tell you about this. Deal with each point completely, wrap it up with a mini conclusion, and then move on. Do not return to a point that you have already discussed. This only confuses your audience. Speak extemporaneously. Sometimes when you're speaking, a perfect example, story, or piece of humor will jump into your mind. Because this is natural and spontaneous, it's a wonderful way to connect with your audience. Signal this extemporaneous point by saying something like, I just thought of something that illustrates this perfectly. Or you can also say, just last night on television somebody was saying. Let the listeners know that you are digressing from the body of your talk. Or you can say, let me digress for a moment. Then, when you finish the story, like shifting gears, transition back into the body of your talk. Sometimes I say, here's a quick sidebar on this subject, or here's something that just happened last week. Whatever you say and however you say it, your audience must feel that you are in complete control and that your talk has a beginning, middle, and an end. Discipline yourself to stay on track. There are many speakers who are what I call enthusiasts. They are positive, funny, and articulate. They are usually intelligent, experienced, and well-informed, but their talks wander all over the place. They often start well with an opening story or important point. From then on, they leap from point to point, going backwards, forward, and sideways, and blurting out whatever thought, story, or joke pops into their mind along the way. Often they are funny, likable, and entertaining. Audiences laugh and applaud. But at the end, the audience has no real idea what the speaker was talking about or trying to convey. People leave feeling somehow disappointed, as if they'd been invited for dinner and all they got was an appetizer. Maintaining coherence. There's a deep psychological desire for people to sense reason, logic, and order in the universe. This is called a sense of coherence. Whenever you give a talk that moves clearly from point to point, you satisfy this need. As a result, the audience feels relaxed and comfortable with you. They are interested and curious to see where you are going next. In Chapter 2, I mentioned the speech design method of drawing a series of large circles in a row from the top of a page to the bottom, and having each circle represent a key point that you're going to touch on. With my sales audiences, I teach what I call the spine and rib method of asking questions and developing a sales presentation. The spine represents the individual vertebrae, the key points to make in a conversation. The ribs represent the digressions, stories, quotes, or illustrations you use to bring the major points to life or prove them to your audience. Planning your talk so that you go from point to point, like a frog leaping from lily pad to lily pad, makes it easier for you to remember and more enjoyable for your audience to hear. Write it out word for word. Writing out key sentences word for word enables you to make sure your point is phrased in such a way that it will have its greatest possible effect on your audience. Look at the difference between saying something like, "You can do anything you want," and expressing the same thought by saying, "What you can do in the future is limited only by your own imagination." It's the same statement, just said differently because of the way it's written down and memorized. Use the power of 3. One of the most powerful speech devices is to speak in threes. For some reason, the human mind is unduly affected when you explain or express something using 3 phrases. For example, in the Gettysburg Address, Lincoln used the famous words, "of the people, by the people, for the people." John F. Kennedy's famous inaugural address contained the words, "pay any price, bear any burden, meet any hardship." So in my talks, I will often say, you have the ability right now to solve any problem, overcome any obstacle, and achieve any goal you can set for yourself. The more time and thought you put into the phrases and sentences in your talks, the more powerful and persuasive you will be. Some years ago, a friend was encouraging me to write a book. He made this wonderful statement. He said, "Writing is something that you can't get worse at by doing." It's the same thing with speaking. You can only get better at speaking when you speak. That is why the key to success in speaking is, to paraphrase Albert Hubbard, to speak and speak and speak and speak and speak and speak and speak. Creating audience rapport. The more people like you, the more open they will be to being influenced and persuaded by you. As Willy Loman in Death of a Salesman said, "The most important thing is to be liked." Nothing gets the audience more involved with your message than for you to smile and be warm and genial when you stand before them. The more you appear to be enjoying yourself, the more the audience will enjoy being with you. The more people like you, the more they will open up to you and be receptive to what you want them to do. One of the most powerful ways to build audience involvement is for you to ask questions. Whenever you ask a person a question, he is conditioned to answer. Even if he doesn't know the answer, or if it is a trick question or rhetorical device, when you ask a question, you grab his attention. He searches his mind for the possible answer. He leans forward to hear from you what the answer might be. For example, when I want to grab the attention of a business audience, I casually ask, "What is the highest paid and most important work in America?" First of all, the audience responds with silence. Then people begin to call out possible answers. Show business, sales, professional speaking, sports. After they've all taken a stab at the answer, I smile and say, "The highest paid and most valuable work in America is thinking." This is because of all things that people do, thinking has the greatest possible consequences. The better you think, the better decisions you make. The better decisions you make, the better actions you will take. The better actions you take, the better results you get, and the better will be the quality of your life and work. Everything begins with thinking. I then talk about some of the thinking tools and techniques of the most effective people in business and industry. Throughout my talk, I loop back to the ways that top people in this business think in different situations. This theme, running like a thread through my talk, keeps people totally engaged. Keeping good timing and pacing. The best definition of a good talk to an audience of any size is enthusiastic conversation. Think of driving a car with a standard transmission rather than an automatic. With a standard transmission, you continually shift gears in your talk. You can go faster or slower. You can speak louder or softer. You can change the intensity of your voice from relaxed to almost passionate. When you continually vary the tempo, speed, and volume of your words, pausing and then continuing, faster and then slower, you keep the audience as involved with you as they would be watching a NASCAR race. This makes whatever you're saying far more interesting and enjoyable for the listeners. They never get a chance to relax or to become bored. You're always changing some elements of the talk. I'll talk about this in greater length in Chapter 8. When speaking to large audiences, you will almost invariably be asked to give shorter talks. Large audiences are most often gathered for conferences at which there are multiple speakers. Thus, they have tight time frames, and the various talks have to fit into these constraints. For example, a friend of mine was recently booked to speak at an international convention and flown to Hong Kong to give a 12-minute talk on his particular subject. That was the precise amount of time that the convention organizers had allotted for this talk on their schedule. The amount of information you include in your talk is determined by the amount of time you are given. The rule that I follow is that if I am asked to speak for up to 30 minutes, I build the talk around 3 key points. If I'm asked to speak for up to 1 hour, I build the talk around 5 key points. If I'm asked to speak for up to 90 minutes, I include 7 points. These guidelines give you a template with which you can develop any talk. Summarizing and closing. This is often the most important part of your talk, the part that will be remembered the longest. It must be planned and delivered with care. The rule is that you should memorize your opening and closing so that you could wake up and deliver them from a sound sleep. Your closing remarks should be like a very clear period, if not an exclamation mark, at the end of a sentence. The simplest way to close a talk is to summarize your key points by repeating them one by one and giving the natural conclusion that follows from your remarks. Your final remarks are the call to action that asks or tells the audience what you wanted to do with the information you have just presented. The most important principle is to end your talk with a punch. Sometimes you can use the rule of 3 to conclude your remarks and make your final recommendations. Sometimes you can end with a quote or a poem. If appropriate, you can end with a joke that relates back to your story and emphasizes the main point you were trying to make. In Chapter 11, you will learn how to end with a bang. When you reach the end, stop. When you finish your talk, stop speaking and stand silently, smiling at the audience. When I was a younger speaker, at the end of my talks, I would say thank you and immediately began looking around to see how to get off the stage. Sometimes I would start shuffling or stacking up my written materials. I found later that this merely disconcerts or confuses the audience. Instead, I learned the discipline of standing perfectly still and smiling at the end of my talk, signaling that the talk was over and that it was now the audience's responsibility to acknowledge and respond. Wait for it. Again and again, as I stood there silently, first one person would begin to clap, then another and another. Soon the entire audience would be clapping. If you are an outstanding speaker, one person will stand up while continuing to clap. Then a person next to him or behind him will stand up. One by one, the audience members will rise to their feet, giving you a standing ovation. But you have to wait for it. Now I'd like to talk to you about special occasion speaking. There will be times when you may be asked to speak on a special occasion, often with little notice or time for preparation. These can be important moments in your life and in the lives of others, and they must be attended to with care and attention. The 5 most common special occasion speeches are 1. Awards and congratulations. 2. Introductions or thanks at a public event. 3. Birthdays or anniversaries. 4. Weddings. And 5. funerals. In each case, you should use all of your speaking skills to give an excellent speech. Let's begin with number 1, awards and congratulations. Think through your remarks and write them down before you speak. Be clear about the purpose of the award and what the person has done to deserve it. Everyone is watching your performance and taking note of what you say, especially the recipient of the award. The more important your position in the organization, the greater will be the impact of your words and the longer they will be remembered. Whenever someone is acknowledged and congratulated in front of others, especially his or her peers, the occasion is a major event. By speaking with warmth, intelligence, and knowledge about the recipient's valuable accomplishment, you can have a major effect on the person and on all the others who are watching. The second is introductions or thanks. You may be asked to introduce the speaker at a public talk or association meeting. Take this responsibility seriously. Everyone is watching. On many occasions, because of the time and attention given to the introduction of the speaker, the introduction itself is actually better than the speech. Many aspiring executives have put themselves on the fast track by giving an outstanding introduction to a senior executive or important industry speaker. Some years ago, I was invited to introduce Barbara Bush, the wife of former President George H.W. Bush, to a large audience. I prepared thoroughly and gave such a strong introduction that she got a standing ovation as she walked onto the stage. The president, who was watching, personally thanked me afterwards. I never forgot it. You may be asked to thank a speaker after a talk. In this case, keep notes of the key points covered by the speaker. When you go up to thank him or her, briefly recap what you felt were the most important parts of the speech. Thank you for that wonderful talk. We all enjoyed your remarks. What I most liked about what you said was, and then you say what you liked. When you speak well on your feet in front of an audience, people automatically think that you are smarter, more articulate, and more competent than others. Don't blow it. The third type is birthdays or anniversaries. These are major events in the lives of most people. When you are asked to speak or give a toast, do your homework. Speak to the person in advance and ask her a little about her life. Ask others about her to discover little-known facts that you can weave into your remarks. When you speak, always be uplifting and congratulatory. Avoid jokes at the expense of the people you are talking about. Make them feel good about themselves. By so doing, you make everyone in attendance feel good about themselves as well. The fourth special occasion speech is weddings. This is one of the most important occasions in a person's life and in the lives of the parents of the bride and groom. The things you say and the words you use will be remembered for years. Plan them with care. Some years ago, I was invited to the wedding of the children of some very nice people. They were blue-collar workers with a limited budget. They asked their 23-year-old son, a mechanic, to propose the toast for his 25-year-old sister who was getting married. The wedding was a lot of fun, and everyone was drinking, laughing, and making jokes about the newlyweds and being married, sometimes a bit off color. But when the brother got up to speak, it was immediately obvious that he took his job seriously, and he was well prepared. As he began to speak about his sister, everyone settled down. For 15 minutes he spoke about their lives together growing up, and about what a wonderful woman she was. He went back over the years and told little stories about their childhoods, their parents, and their experiences as brother and sister. By the time he raised his glass and proposed a toast to a lifetime of love and happiness, there was not a dry eye in the room. When you are asked to speak at a wedding, think about your words being timeless. Speak only about love, commitment, and lifelong happiness. Be glad for the bride and groom, and wish them all the best in their lives together. Your words mean a lot. And the fifth type of special occasion speaking is funerals. You may be asked to give a eulogy at the funeral of a friend or family member. When you do, you must write out every word in advance for 2 reasons. First, you will probably become quite emotional as you read it. If it is not written, you will lose your place and your composure. Second, If you have written it carefully, people will want copies of it to keep forever. When you read the eulogy, go slowly and recite each word. It should not be more than 5 to 8 minutes long. In writing a eulogy, begin by talking about how the deceased was a good, loving, honest, caring person. Go on to talk about his or her family members and how important they were to him or her. Talk about some of the person's history and accomplishments. End with a statement of sorrow and regret, and that we shall never forget his or her inspiration or contribution to our lives. Offering the eulogy for someone is one of the most important talks you can ever give. Plan and prepare it with care. Here's a summary. Speaking in front of large audiences is one of the most challenging and exciting things that you will ever do. Thousands of speakers give talks to large audiences every day all over the world. It is a learnable skill. Remember that how you deliver a speech is as important as the speech itself. When you learn to give excellent public talks as a result of preparation and practice, you will become one of the most persuasive and influential people in your field.